I appreciate the points that Tim has raised, and I'm going to try to address some of them right now and some perhaps in the closing arguments. It's important to understand here that when Congress passed the Energy Independence and Security Act, the discussion of indirect effects is in the context of something called life cycle analysis. So I apologize for putting you through some of what's going to be maybe some painful or tedious discussion, but you need to understand this because it's the context in which we need to think about biofuels and other alternatives. So again, I believe that inexpensive plant materials are going to catalyze the growth of biofuels industries. I think this will and must happen. The point is that we can design these biofuel industries for better environmental performance. One important tool to do that is life cycle analysis, or LCA. It has a lot of value if we use it properly. It's essentially an accounting tool for environmental impacts. But we need to use it within established rules. We know what happens to companies that violate financial accounting rules, right? Or the kind of confusion that it generates. There are rules for accounting for the environmental impacts, the internationally accepted rules, and it's called life cycle analysis. Unfortunately, LCA has not been used properly in some biofuel analyses, and it's undermined the goals, I believe, important national goals of increased energy security and real environmental improvement. Okay, again, I don't agree with the premise of indirect land use change, but for the next little bit, I'm going to accept the premise and then argue about that the life cycle analysis has not been properly applied here. So what does the law say? Well, it says this, that the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, the term life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, the aggregate quantity of gas emissions, including direct and significant indirect emissions, such as significant emissions from land use change, which is what's brought us here today, related to the full fuel life cycle, okay? The word life cycle means something, okay? It's not a word without meaning, okay? The law correctly, I believe, describes life cycle analysis in the red oval, but indirect land use change, unfortunately, is outside the life cycle, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So what are LCA models? Essentially, they're a set of accounting procedures for determining and comparing environmental performance. The goal is environmental improvement. And the way that you do that is to find out where you are environmentally. You have a benchmark, and then you work to improve it. For example, one of the classic examples is disposable diapers versus reusable diapers. It turns out that disposable diapers actually have a lower environmental impact than reusable diapers. I hope that comforts people here. I already changed all the diapers on our kids when I found this out. And the reason is primarily because of the soap, the energy required to heat the water for the reusable diapers, okay? So you establish a set of accounting principles and you compare two things, okay? So LCA exists to make proper comparisons, and there are rules that we need to follow. Unfortunately, a lot of the current LCA analysis for biofuels is very, very flawed. So we have international standards, the ISO 14040 standards, for example, and it isn't a life cycle analysis just because someone says it is. It becomes a life cycle analysis when it meets certain standards or certain rules for the accounting procedures here. So what are those rules? Again, I think we're going to be seeing life cycle analysis more and more. It's a tool for environmental improvement. I think it'll get included in more and more of our federal legislation, so it's important, and state legislation, important we understand it. So here's some principles in plain English. Use the most recent, most accurate data possible. You select the reference system. What exactly are you comparing? Okay? You make it easy for others to check your data and your methods. Transparency. Transparency is a principle of financial accounting. It's also a principle of environmental accounting. You set clear system boundaries, both in time and in space, and they need to be equal or comparable for the reference system or the reference product and what you're comparing it against, the things that you're comparing. If you have a multi-product system, and again, this is critical for biofuels, if you have a multi-product system, you allocate the environmental costs among all the products. We use land to produce a lot of different stuff. One of my objections to indirect land use change as it's carried out is that it allocates all of the incremental cost of any land expansion to biofuel production. Then you perform a sensitivity analysis. How do the results vary if your assumptions or data change? So some problems with the existing analyses. We're attempting to predict agriculture in 2022 using economic models, okay? I just don't believe we can predict much useful about the economy in 2022. Okay. We must insist on tests of the models against past history, okay? It's one thing to have a model. I'm a physical scientist, so we develop models also. But you need to test your models. How good are they? So far, and maybe I'll have time to show some of this data, maybe I don't know if I will, but they seem to fail these tests. What exactly are you comparing? And this is where I'm a little confused by some of the arguments that Tim has just presented. Apparently, from what I understand, we need to leave forests or fields to sequester carbon, okay? But that works against the goal of using that land also to provide food, or actually animal feed, okay? We don't use land to grow food, not much of it. Most of it's animal feed. You have to decide what your products are, and then you make a comparison. If you wanted to devote all the land to carbon sequestration, that would accomplish one objective, but it wouldn't accomplish other kinds of objectives. You make it easy for others to check your data and methods. It's not easy to check these results. I've been trying to do it. They're very complicated, highly linked models. You need to set clear system boundaries, again, physical and temporal. Indirect effects currently are assessed only against biofuels, not petrol fuels. If you have a multi-product system, you need to allocate the environmental cost. The environmental cost of indirect land use changes assessed against biofuels, in spite of the fact that we used land to produce a variety of things: food, feed, fiber, timber, so on and so forth. And then a sensitivity analysis. How do your results change if the data or assumptions change? So some really big ones have been changed. So I want to show you a couple of tests. Again, this is what you do when you have a life cycle or any other model. Testing indirect land use change theory against the reality. These data are from Dr. Robert Brown of Iowa State University. And what Dr. Brown has plotted here is the deforestation rate in the Brazilian Amazon, for which we have data, versus the price of soybeans over a number of years, okay? The correlation coefficient here is about 2%, okay? The ability, in other words, for you to predict land clearing rates in the Amazon versus soybean prices is essentially nil. There is no correlation statistically. So a test of indirect land use change is, again, remember, the prediction is soybean prices go up, land clearing rates go up, okay? This test here, or at least this time period, indirect land use change fails that test. Okay, a second test. Once again, courtesy of Dr. Brown. Plot the commodity food price index versus, again, the deforestation rate in the Amazon, okay? Once again, there is no correlation. You can't statistically argue that there's any relationship between food prices and land clearing rates in the Amazon. Lots of other things lead to land clearing in the Amazon and elsewhere.